The last gamble. Ukraine goes for broke. 2 offensive operations have recently been launched by the armed forces of Ukraine. One which has ended in total failure, and the other which has resulted in some moderate success. First, it was the long-awaited Kherson Offensive in the south, followed by an attack in the Kharkov Oblast, further to the north. The southern attack was much larger and made negligible gains, yet lost the equivalent of an entire division, some 10,000 men. Whereas the northern offensive made significant gains with a smaller force, pushing the Russians back and forcing them to retreat to avoid encirclement. Ukrainian losses were also very high in this sector, but at least some ground was taken, and a victory has been achieved, potentially threatening the main Russian force in the Donbass, as its flank has been exposed. The Kherson Offensive lasted around 1 week, and has basically ground to a halt due to heavy Russian artillery and airstrikes. The situation near Kharkov is much more fluid, as the Ukrainian army moves into vacated territories, raising flags and doing some PR for Washington. Meanwhile, Russian regulars are moving in for a counter-offensive, which will drive the Ukrainians back. We can expect this in the next 3 to 4 days, after they've assembled enough forces. So why did this happen? How was Russia caught off guard like this? If we look at the numbers, we have to remember the total available manpower allocated for this operation is around 250,000, compared with 700,000 for the Ukraine. The front line stretches some 1,200 kilometers, leaving some areas with gaps of up to 4 kilometers completely unmanned. The Ukrainian army exploited this and basically concentrated a powerful force in this area, punching a hole through Russian lines at their weakest. The Russians had stronger units in the south because they could not afford to lose Kherson, whereas in the Kharkov area, giving up territory temporarily is still viable due to the proximity of the Russian border, allowing for reinforcements to be more easily brought to the front, which is happening as we speak. These short-term gains for the Ukraine came at a great cost, however, as they committed the last of their best and newly trained brigades fresh out of the UK. All that's been achieved is a further depletion of the armed forces of Ukraine, and thus shortening the conflict. So this will actually work in Russia's favor, as Ukraine runs out of men and material. It doesn't matter how much military hardware the collective West throws at Kiev, supplies are running out. Yes, the arms factories are building replacements, but they won't be available until next year, when there won't even be a Ukraine. So the outcome is inevitable. Russia will force the Washington regime in Kiev to capitulate one way or another. Although they outnumber the Russian forces by nearly 3 to 1, they are outgunned and do not control the skies. That being said, this victory has been magnified beyond proportion, as we see Western media having a proverbial orgasm as they allow their fantasy of a complete rout of Russian forces, followed by a march on Moscow to blind them from reality. This premature celebration will be met with a harsh hangover of truth as the war escalates over the next few weeks, and Russian forces reclaim these lost territories. A false sense of confidence has been achieved, which is very dangerous, and will cost even more lives, as the collective West will continue throwing money and weapons into the fight, as these attacks were timed perfectly to coincide with a $3 billion aid package. This offensive can be compared with Germany's last-ditch attempt at defeating the Western Allies in December of 1944 in what became known as the Arden Offensive, or the Battle of the Bulge. The Germans gathered what panzer divisions they had left and cobbled together 4 powerful armies, including 2 panzer armies, totaling 400,000 men and over 1,000 tanks and AFVs. It was assumed the Wehrmacht was a spent force this late in the war, but it wasn't, and the Americans were caught by surprise and overrun across a 70-mile front as the Germans pushed forward, creating a salient 50 miles deep into Belgium in just 8 days, even surrounding and capturing over 7,000 men in one sector. But fuel shortages made it impossible for the offensive to continue, and it ground to a halt. They inflicted severe losses on the Americans, but these were soon replaced, whereas the Germans were unable to replace losses of their own. The Arden Offensive delayed the Allied invasion of Germany by 6 weeks, thus prolonging the war. However, some historians will argue that had they kept their forces back for defense, the German panzer divisions could have been better used to hold off the Allied attacks, and perhaps even fought them to a stalemate, which definitely would have prolonged the war, or even changed the outcome. We will never know. Anyway, back to 2022, and this Pyrrhic victory near Kharkov. All that Kiev has achieved is a PR win and a temporary halt to Russian offensive operations in the Donbass, as they now have to focus on reclaiming lost territory. These offensives have cost NATO their best units. Just to be clear who the belligerents actually are in this war, it is the forces of NATO, guided and directed by Washington against the Russian Federation, using Ukrainian men as cannon fodder, and then taking control of and/or eliminating all opposition by any means necessary, short of a nuclear strike. For now. Europe is sacrificing its economies by siding with the USA in its war with Russia. So we can say it is in fact Russia versus the USA. Only Washington is employing Ukrainian men to operate the guns and absorb Russian firepower. There are also thousands of Western volunteers on the ground, wearing Ukrainian uniforms, and no doubt there must also be professional soldiers from the collective West, also pretending to be Ukrainian. If only they knew who they were serving and risking their lives for. These poor souls are hopelessly misguided and dying alongside their Ukrainian counterparts by the thousands. In conclusion, this is a tactical victory for the Ukraine, but a strategic failure. Until next time, thanks for watching.